Good morning and peace to you. You know, when Pastor Allen asked me to briefly speak on my perceptions of Jesus, I quickly said yes, because here at First United Methodist Church at Roseville, we are exploring similar themes throughout this season. I didn't know just how challenging it would be to sum up my thoughts in just a few moments, but here we go. And so the claims about Jesus can be placed on a continuum of a high Christology, which emphasizes the divinity of Christ, and a lower Christology, which centers on the humanity of Jesus. Within the African American experience, Jesus was often seen as that representation of God's bodily and present help that walked with us in times of struggle. We identify with the person of Jesus, that young Jewish man from Palestine who lived in an occupied state, who lived in poverty, who lived a life that was threatened, and who was ultimately killed by state violence. Jesus, the one who was found among and ministered to the least of these in societies, those whose back were up against the wall, those whose society either oppressed or those whose lives were deemed expendable or not mattered. And as Cone argued, if Jesus were to be found today, then he would necessarily be found in and centered around the Black experience. Or as the Catholics say, God has a preferential option for the poor. Or as I would say, Jesus is found within those who still have to assert that their lives matter and still get pushback. And so now here in 2020, as the events of this year seems to just pile on, I've been turning more and more to Black women theologians like Katie Cannon and Jacqueline Grant, who guide us to not only look at racism, but how it interacts with other structural realities such as classism and sexism and patriarchy and later heterosexism. As such, womanist theology is centered on seeing the person and work of Jesus through the lens of the lived experiences of Black women who stand at these intersections of multiple oppressions and identities. Simply, it is seeing Jesus through the lens of my wife, Kawami, or my daughter, Niara. These womanist theologians were able to push back on certain problematic notions like making surrogacy a sign of virtue, which toxically outpictures as presenting long suffering and burden bearing and the acceptance of oppression as a sign of being a good Christian. No. Womanist theologians say that Jesus, who lived a life contextualized by suffering and pain, does not valorize it, but resist it. And Jesus does this not only by accompanying those who are suffering, but by empowering people to struggle against those systems that cause the suffering in the first place. And so the spirit of the first century Jesus movement in Palestine lives on in those who are in the streets fighting for justice now. It lives in the breath of the massive protests sparked by the killing of George Floyd, whose own breath was taken from him by state violence. It lives in the spirit of the frontline workers who have dedicated their lives to saving the lives of other folk despite the deadly perils of a pervasive pandemic. And it lives in seeing God in your neighbor and loving them through action and advocacy despite the danger. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone is called to the protest line. Everyone must find their own lane. It does mean that you have to find ways to honor Jesus by attending to a ministry that is for and to and with those who are the least of these, those who need to assert that their lives matter. And as Raquel St. Clair said, to take up our cross in discipleship means to follow Jesus in a ministry that is life-affirming, God-glorifying, and agony-eradicating. Discipleship means, as Monica Coleman says, participating in a community committed to salvific acts for the redemption of the whole, and that salvation is the insurrectionary and revolutionary process of challenging the status quo. Now, this is a different perspective for those who primarily see Jesus as a divine Christ whose main mission and purpose was to enable a personal salvation and an access pass to heaven. A womanist framework about Jesus affirms that the spirituality of the personal is fulfilled in the socio-political realities of enfleshed beings and communities on earth. Jesus embodies the maxim that the personal is political, especially when viewed from the position of the powerless instead of the privileged powerful. So here in 2020, in our society, for our communities and for our churches, Jesus, while informed by the lenses I previously discussed, invites us into a life of radical solidarity and neighborliness, a discipleship that stands with and for those in society whose lives are relegated to matterlessness. It looks like confronting systems of oppression, voting our values, and holding leaders accountable. And it also looks like making good trouble, like John Lewis did, like Jesus did, like Harriet Tubman, or Fannie Lou Hamer, or Mary McLeod Bethune, or Ida B. Wells, or Betty Shabazz, or Michelle Obama, or Bree Newsom, or Larisha Hawkins, or Patrisse Cullors, or Alicia Garza. In this way, the view of Jesus empowers us to truly make real the beloved community on earth. And in this year, 2020, a year characterized by pandemics and politics, that Jesus, I believe, is needed more than ever before. Blessings to you.